Welcome back or welcome to the Next Level podcast. I'm your host, John Harris, and I am extremely excited this week for this episode to be joined by Judy Selby. Typically we have security leaders, security influencers, or really anybody from around the industry or near the industry who can speak to topics that we think are relevant and impactful for our listeners. And Judy is no exception to that rule. She is a well acknowledged and rewarded practitioner in the legal cybersecurity field specifically. You have a ton of accolades, Judy. I know you're a humble person, so the link to all them will be in the bio, and so I won't,
Okay.
read them off here. But we've gotten to know each other through some mutual acquaintances and some leadership and development coaching work that we've done together. And you're a published author, just a whole bunch of amazing things, and we'll touch on some of those today. But where I think there's like unique and interesting perspective is in the world of risk management and security. A lot of times, cybersecurity and specifically kind of the legalities and the insurance side, and like how do we protect ourselves and manage it, can be such a challenging topic for folks. It's either way too high level, and they don't feel equipped to dive into it, or it's just scary because they don't, it's like, if you don't know about it, you don't have to pay attention to it. And so I'm excited to have you on here to kind of unpack some of that, maybe demystify it a bit, and go in a couple different directions. So, Judy, thank you for joining me. Happy to have you here.
Thanks so much for having me, John. It's really a pleasure to be here. And boy, you've hit on some of the topics I care deeply about. And I've always been extremely empathetic to people in the risk management roles, the CISOs, the chief security officers, any chief information officers, anybody in this space trying to deal with this stuff. And you use the word demystifying. I actually wrote a book, boy, I don't know how long ago. It's anybody can reach out to me. I'll just send you a PDF. It's on Amazon, but it's called Demystifying Cyber Insurance, and where I really try to break these things down for people. So yeah, I'm happy to just send a PDF to anybody who wants it. But yeah, I practiced law for 34 years, and I was in the insurance coverage space, and I would say probably around 2011, 2012, really took a deep dive into cyber insurance. And for anybody who feels badly about not really understanding it, in my humble opinion, it's the most complicated policy on the market. And so please don't feel bad about it. It's, it provides, the what we call the first party coverage and the third party coverage. So it's a very, very complex product. So don't feel bad about that. And but yeah, so I did that for a number of years, as you noted. I had some really, really good success there. And I can talk to you, if you're interested later on, about my theories around how to be successful, in when you're in the service business, like we are. And I transitioned out of practicing law very, very recently, and started my own business in the middle of October, doing doing coaching work and working with professionals who are wanting to reach that next level. And I'm a blue collar kid, and so bringing the blue collar work ethic to the professions is kind of my mindset around all of this. But I still do a lot of cyber insurance work on the side. People, looking for policies, wanting some help with that, or drafting policies for people. So that's kind of what I'm doing right now.
Love it. And kind of to go forward a little bit, had you always in my experience in compliance and in risk, a lot of my peers had JDs, were lawyers. And so even for a lot of folks, that's just a natural progression along their way of like go to law school, then they end up in compliance, whether it was when I was in international trade compliance or cyber work or other things, consulting, etc. Was that something that you always wanted? Did you always want to be a lawyer? Did that happen along the way? What was that path like?
No, quite the opposite. I was a trainer, like a trainer in gyms. and a coach of teams.
Yeah.
And I did that for years. When I was a skinny kid, I just turned 18. I had a really, really bad knee injury. I tore just about everything you can tear in the knee joint. And so your whole life changes really fast. But I kept being I might have overdone it on the exercise side a little bit over the years. And so, when I was in my early 30s, I had had 5 knee surgeries already, and I was dealing with a hole in my femur, which is the thigh bone from overuse. And I was like, man, you got to sit down, and you got to get a sit down job. And so, and I didn't feel comfortable doing math, so that kind of took business school out of the picture. So I went to law school. I applied to one school. I found out that's not how you choose the law school you should go to. But, as I said, I'm a blue collar kid. Nobody in my family went to college until my sister and me. I was the first to go beyond college. And in fact, that's like the title of my book is like how to thrive as a lawyer, even if you didn't go to Harvard or Yale. And so, that's kind of my thing. So, I get out of law school drowning in debt. There's a
Mm.
recession going on. And so, a lot of people in law school are like, well, I want to do this type of law or that type of law. And then I remember one of my colleagues said to a bunch of us one day, listen, you're going to get a job doing whatever anybody hires you to do, and that's what you're going to specialize in. and that's kind of what happened. So I got a job at a great firm, and they did a lot of insurance coverage work, and so that's what I did. And then, as I said, when I kind of saw the writing on the wall with increasing regulation,
Mm.
and as people were using less documents and everything started to become digitalized, the opportunity and the risk around that, the ESI, electronically stored information.
Mm.
And took a bunch of courses at MIT, which is, kind of funny. I always joke I can't even spell MIT, and here I am. The kid who didn't want to do math is now taking courses at MIT, and but really to issue spot and understand the concepts and what's happening. I took courses in the Internet of Things, cybersecurity, big data,
Mm.
crisis management. And there were a lot of risk managers in that class, I'll tell you that. And I was the only lawyer. I was the only lawyer of all the students up in Cambridge for that, which I found very refreshing, frankly. But and it was interesting because you get to see how people think about lawyers. They're like, yeah, the party of no. They're the ones who are always telling us we can't do anything. So that was pretty funny. But so that's what I did, and it was a lot of self-study. Lawyers, at law firms, you live and die by the billable hour. So a lot of what I did was not
Mm.
billable time, but I made myself into, a bit of an expert in this
Yeah.
space. And so combining that with my insurance background, became very, very well suited to advise companies about cyber issues, privacy issues, which is like the huge issue that nobody talks about now,
Mm.
non-breach privacy issues, like all the regulations and even the common law out there around what companies are doing with their information. A lot of companies now are being just inundated with lawsuits around tracking tools on their websites. And so I'm very, as I said, very empathetic to people dealing with these risks because it's constantly evolving and constantly changing. And so, yeah, I feel very passionately about it, and would advise your audience to, get themselves good advisors in this space, get themselves really good insurance brokers, and make sure they do their best to, make educated decisions about these issues.
Yeah, I mean, you touched on a few things that I want to highlight. I guess first of what you just mentioned is like you don't know what you don't know, and so and as you grow professionally, and we're seen as experts, right? So eventually, and again, I think a lot of folks who listen to this podcast either um, they fall into a couple different categories. They either are emerging leaders, young professionals who aspire to be in a role of leadership one day. They're already in that role, or they're service providers who provide services to those types of folks. And so I think whatever bucket you fall into, having a general understanding and knowledge of a wide breadth of categories to service that that future or that client, and whether that client is in my perspective as like a risk management professional, it's the CEO, right? So the CEO calls me and says, "How do you feel about our cybersecurity coverage? I need an opinion on that," right?
Yes,
So
you
if
do.
I don't have
Yes,
an
you
opinion,
do.
I need to go find one. But also, there's something I want to pull back on a little bit around. You explained your kind of self-education process that you went through and going to MIT and saying, "Oh, there's a," and either whether it was like, hey, there's a professional opportunity here because here's an area where I can get really smart in and be able to go deeper and provide a lot of value. And or I think projecting out around this is a kind of uncovered opportunity, meaning I can get good at it, and there's a great market opportunity here because people are going to need this. People are like, this is the next frontier, around things like IoT and privacy. Even getting into probably, and maybe you're you're getting out at the right time where AI and other things become
I
um,
don't know. I don't know about
the
that.
next frontier. But tell me a little bit about that kind of, to me, it looks like that continuous education, that never finish mentality around it's not just good enough that I'm going to go and get my law degree and then go and kind of like support here, but I'm going to go to MIT, which is a very well established, well known entity, and get really educated in these areas so that I can maximize my value and my impact. So am I gleaning correctly that that was the thought process behind it, and go a little bit deeper on kind of that approach and what led you to pursue that?
Absolutely. A lot of my colleagues and friends, when I was, what I call a baby lawyer, and I was
Mhm.
doing a lot of environmental coverage work. So big claims arising out of environmental liabilities. And I also
Mhm.
did a lot of pharmaceutical liability matters, and we were arbitrating those in London. But, you know, when I talk to my friends who are still doing that work, it's kind of like, they're doing the same thing for 30 years
Yeah.
and they're very, very good at it. But I wanted the challenge. I saw the writing on the wall, with digital information, and I just thought it could be super fun, super challenging. With regard to MIT, believe me, I didn't tell anybody I was taking any courses there until I passed them, because I had no confidence that I was going to pass that, at least that first one.
Yeah.
But yes, it was very purposeful in that way. I fully believe that, I've been blessed with certain talents and gifts, and I'm the beneficiary of sacrifices made on my behalf, by others, including my parents and grandparents, etc. And I feel that very strongly. I have an obligation to always do more and maximize every opportunity, challenge, talent that I have been given. So it was this kind of combination of things, and it was a slow process in terms of the market developing, because if you think back, and I don't think your audience will be surprised to hear this, like around 2012, 2013, and a good 5 years following that, people didn't know what cyber risk was. If they did know what it was, they didn't think they had it.
Mm.
I remember talking to so many people over the years saying, I remember one hedge fund guy said to me, "We fly under the radar. We have no cyber risk." Um, People would say, "I'm not Target. I'm not Home Depot. I'm not a big hospital. Nobody wants our stuff." And so we've all come to learn that that's not true. And I think what really changed was this massive privacy regulation that came out in 2018 in the EU. And then people were like, "Oh man, this is real." So that helped. And then some of the big breaches. And we talked before before we started recording here about like what are the big issues now. And I think what we're seeing now is kind of this confluence of everybody being addicted to their devices, and everything is done online now. And people are sharing so much information, some by choice, some not by choice. And so there's just everything about everybody is out there somewhere for some cyber criminal to find it. And so what we're seeing now for um, not just high net worth individuals, but it's happening a lot with high net worth individuals, but for just employees of certain companies, cyber criminals going online, piecing together everything they know about you from what you post on, Facebook, LinkedIn, whatever, and then using AI probably, crafting very sophisticated phishing schemes, not just the email, but a whole scheme, whether it's a fake job posting or whatever it may be, that really kind of suck people in, and you would have no reason to think that it's not real. And so what happens is they're connecting with these people, they figure out how to get into that person's corporate environment, and, we've seen that in some very high profile breaches lately. And then when they're in the corporate environment, then, depending on what type of business you're in, it could be just absolutely devastating. Particularly if the company is a service provider to many other companies. So these third party incidents, sometimes they say like a single point of failure,
Right.
the software provider. SolarWinds was probably the first big one that people talked about. And that's going on and on and on and on. There was a big one just the other day affecting a vendor to a lot of school systems.
Mm.
And so these types of things are, bringing the issue home that there is tremendous risk for everybody. And it's very hard to anticipate what it might be, but there are certain practices that people and companies can use to really minimize the chance that something will happen to them. It's often a crime of opportunity and
Right.
least resistance. And so the harder you make it, obviously, the better. One of the other new trends we're seeing now, which I kind of alluded to a minute ago, is the attacks on individuals.
Mm.
And so I'm doing now, even in my own, now that I have my own business, but a lot of work in the personal cyber insurance space.
Mm.
But I'm a big believer, and I've said this from day one. I've never been a broker. I never make a dime if anybody buys an insurance policy, but I'm a huge advocate of cyber insurance, and but getting the right coverage. You can't get the right coverage if you don't know what your risk profile is, like anything else.
Yeah.
You just don't, you may not need, we, I don't know if it's a good example now because the weather's so crazy, but I was going to say you may not need flood insurance if you're like in a certain location, but I'm not so sure that's true anymore. But I hope you understand the point. Like, you don't need to buy car insurance if you don't have a car. Let's just
Right.
say it like that. So you want to make sure that you understand your risk profile, and as I say, work with a really good broker and for all your insurances, and then make sure that your cyber policy fits in really well with your entire insurance portfolio. Because what we find sometimes is if you have a BOP policy, business owner's policy, or if you have a property insurance, you may have some cyber coverage, or even a CGL. You may have some cyber insurance, some endorsement, or some coverage there um, already. And so you want to know that when you're out there shopping for a cyber insurance policy, and because you want to make sure those coverages dovetail really well together. So those are some of the biggest issues that I'm seeing now, and so yeah, I'm a firm believer that this is a universal risk,
Yeah.
And and when you brought up a point earlier about dealing with, the CEO and the boards and stuff like that. One of the biggest challenges in cyber is quantifying the risk and the cost of uh, purchasing, better controls and using vendors and setting up all these systems. And, you're almost proving a negative, not having an incident. And it's very, very challenging. There's certain companies out there now that are very, very helpful in doing that. And so they might be good because I think we all know the C-suite understands numbers much more than they understand, 0-day vulnerabilities, for example.
Right. Yeah, I
So,
mean, and that's such a universal challenge across security, risk, compliance, cyber, physical, regardless of what it is finding but there was like I recall, probably about 15 years ago, there was this uh, a study that came out trying to quantify financial impact of a workplace violence incident, an active shooter. And so it's grim to talk about those things. However, when you are removing the emotional part of it, that because regardless of if it's lives, livelihoods, right? If so, when I was a consultant many years ago, one of my clients had a cyber incident, phishing attempt. They clicked on the attachment. Evildoer got into their systems, laid dormant in there for a number of months so that they wouldn't be detected by any of the endpoint monitoring or any of the issues.
right.
So they had systems in place. They were smart enough to evade them for a period of time, and then they initiated it. Locked up their systems, encrypted, send me Bitcoin, and I'll send you the key. Whatever the case was, right? So now the like nobody the issue was that their entire business operating system came to a halt. They couldn't ship product. And so now you're affecting the potential of livelihoods of people because what if that business shuts down and it can't operate and goes out of business, people lose their jobs, right? So it's a different incident type than an active shooter because you're not going to lose lives per se, but your potential of losing livelihood, impacting jobs, the downstream effects, vendors, everything, the whole thing. And this particular location was a small manufacturing entity in a Midwest town. So there's a second and third order impacts of people who no longer are able to
Yeah.
do those jobs. And so, I think that's where I don't think often enough people look at insurance coverage as part of their overall risk and mitigation strategy to say, because it's that you can't completely avoid negative incidents, right?
No.
Because you get to a place of business disruption, and that's where the pros and cons, where it was like, okay, so for instance, when I dealt with an active shooter incident at one of my facilities way back when, almost 15 years ago. And the CEO was like, "Hey, like, well, how do you want to respond to this?" And I'm like, "Well, we could make it. And we have 3,000 people coming into this factory. I could make it so I wand every single one of them down, and it takes an hour and a half to get in. But just think about what's the risk versus outcome that we're creating, and now like we're not going to be able to manufacture plane parts. That's what we did at that property as effectively as we would. So yes, people's lives matter. We need to make sure we're putting in approaches to support that. If the business goes out of business, then everyone, like all 3,000 of those employees are going to be impacted. Same thing with cyber. It's like we could make it so I have to five-factor authentication every time I even look at a computer. But at some point you accept the risk and mitigate it with things like proper insurance coverage that cover me up to the necessary coverage that I have. And the reason I brought up that incident when I was a consultant is that that entity thought they had great coverage at like a $10 million policy. They didn't realize like 3 days of outage, they were hemorrhaging millions of dollars a day. So that 10 million did not go
Yeah.
very far once they realized what an actual incident would cost them in just a few days.
Yeah, that's such a you've raised so many great points, like so many. And related to cyber in particular, couple of things. You really can lose your life because of cyber now, unfortunately. If somebody hacks into the machinery at a corporation, where they're building things like a manufacturing type of situation, people definitely can get hurt or injured. They That's redundant. Hurt or injured is the same thing. Killed or injured. Um, or a hospital. There have been some very, very close calls where, surgeries have been canceled. People had emergency transfer from one hospital to another because of cyber attacks. And it's the operational impact of cyber attacks now, where the situation, like you described, somebody's in your network, they're watching, they're looking for where they can have the maximum impact, and then they launch the malware, and then you're shut down. So the operational impact can be absolutely devastating, and in my view, especially for small SMEs, an existential threat. So, if you allow me, I'll get on my little soapbox and preach about the value of the insurance. The great thing about cyber insurance is they have on the first party side, meaning you're not being sued by anybody, but it's like a fire insurance policy is a first party policy. What's happening to you that's going to come out of your own pocket if you don't take care of it. So most cyber insurers have these teams of professionals that are all vetted. It's all within the coverage up to your limits. I always have to say, exclusions are, but there's not that many exclusions that are really relevant in cyber insurance, I can honestly say. But they send in what I call a cyber SWAT team that really comes in and now try to find somebody to do this for you when your whole system is shut down. You're not Googling, you don't even know what to Google, uh, even if you did, you couldn't. So they send in, and they usually have an attorney to kind of lead the charge and try to provide, really good guidance around regulatory requirements and all of that, and try to get some attorney-client privilege to apply over
Mm,
the whole situation. But computer forensic team to figure out what's going on and stop it, and then get you back up and running, and then companies to restore your data, go through if data has been exfiltrated, which it probably has, to figure out what data was taken, who was impacted, do we have notification requirements under the law. A lot of policies have reputation coverage, so they'll hire a PR firm to help you deal with it, all of which is to minimize the impact, get you fixed fast, and get you up and running with the least amount of bad press and legal exposure. The other really, really key coverage is business interruption coverage. And so there's two types that are really, really important now. So, the first one is just plain old business interruption. You are shut down. And so there's typically a waiting period, and you negotiate of how long that will be. The shorter, the better for the insured. So let's say it's 12 hours. So you're not going to be covered for the whatever it's probably like your net income loss, dealing with continuing expenses as well. But your coverage will kick in after that point until the time that you're back up and running. And I'm speaking very broadly here,
yeah.
but that's kind of how that works. The other really, really important thing when you think about cyber incidents like CrowdStrike, SolarWinds, or any of the other horrible things that have happened, where a vendor of yours on whom you're dependent is shut down, and it impacts your business. So your supplier had a cyber attack and they can't
Mm,
service you. It's just as bad for you, basically.
right.
And so there's what's often called contingent business interruption or dependent business interruption coverage for that. Those are the things that really can save a company. And then, of course, there's the liability coverage for, like the class action lawsuits and the privacy lawsuits and the regulatory coverage as well. So these are not a substitute for good cyber hygiene and good practices around collecting, storing, using data. but like anything else, like you still have your exit doors and your fire extinguishers in your building, but you still got the cyber insurance, I mean the fire insurance policy. Same thing with cyber. It's a risk transfer mechanism. But for SMEs, I think it's even more than that because it really is so helpful in dealing with the incident. I'll tell you a really, really quick story. One of the earliest ever uh, ransomware incidents. It was back in 2014, I think, and it was a hospital in California. And I actually met the CISO there, so I have a little like the inside scoop of what happened. He spoke at a conference that I attended, and so they all show up to work and they're like, oh my gosh, well, the computer is like, the skull and crossbones, and there's this note and it says you have to pay this amount in Bitcoin. And I'm like, what is Bitcoin? Like, what is this? So this guy calls his teenage son and he says, what is Bitcoin? And he says, oh, it's this digital currency. And they said, well, where do we get it? We have to pay this. And they said, well, they sell it at the vape store. And so all these like suits go down to the vape store and they meet this kid there, and they don't want to go in the vape store, so they make the kid go in there and buy Bitcoin so they can take them. So I always joke with people back then, especially, you don't want to go to the vape store, get the cyber insurance policy and make them go to the vape store.
Yeah.
No.
There's so many, and again, if you kind of take a step back, I know we're really focused on cyber risk and cyber insurance, but the same concepts are universal across really all risk management. It's know your threat landscape. Ask yourself the right questions before you need it. And it's this dichotomy between crying wolf and being prepared. And so, I always say, like, I don't want to come in and tell folks, like, a cyber incident is imminent, or workplace violence is imminent, because it is low likely, but it's high impact. And so there's this,
Mhm.
standard kind of risk management, risk mitigation framework on, like, how, I always take an approach, and I do this today, of like, what are the crown jewels of the business and what could impact them? And if they stopped working today, if we weren't able to do the thing that makes this company the most money, which allows us to pay our employees and operate, what would happen, and how do we mitigate that, and how do we put, again, the like front layer stuff, like good cyber hygiene, like you mentioned, right, the fire extinguishers and the smoke detectors, but also know that, like, and then there's a certain percent chance that um all that stuff fails, because like, I always sit here and think about what, like, there's people whose job it is to find ways to negatively impact my operation.
Yes.
The hackers, that's all they think about. And I can only think about them maybe 8% of my time
Yeah.
because I have all this other stuff I'm worried about, right? So they're exponentially spending more time trying to figure out how to do bad things to me than I can spend on trying to um thwart their efforts. Therefore, I have to have the right, like you said, SWAT team available to me that I can break glass in an emergency and bring those in. So I encourage people. While what Judy just walked through, people might sit here and be like, "Wow, that's overkill." I mean, if I'm even a small business, where if if I get shut down, there's no coming back from that, right? When Target gets breached, like, they can figure it out, right? Well, Fortune 100, but if I put my my evildoer hat on, like, I only have to get it if I go down. I'm probably operating in a target rich environment when I stay out of the Fortune 1000, right? And if I can target 1,000 family grocery stores, and I only have to hit on 10%, and it's very likely that they're sitting there, like you already said, Judy. I don't have to worry about it. I'm not one of the big guys. Well, if I'm just trying to get a little bit here, a little bit there, exfiltrate, and I might not even be trying to, like, we're past malware for Bitcoin. I'm mining for data that I can then use to enable other crimes, like stealing your identity so that I can figure out how to get into bank systems. And there's like and
Yeah.
that's the level I think of kind of criminal intuition that we find ourselves in now, where it's not just I'm trying to lock up your databases so that I can hold it for ransom. Like we're way past that, at least in what I'm seeing in the type of sophistication in cyber criminals and digital criminals that we're seeing today.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think people have to recognize that, as you were alluding to, it's often a crime of opportunity. And so, they may not say I'm targeting your grocery store, but they're just searching on the dark web. And I mean, searching on the web and they're finding vulnerabilities and then they just hit the, kind of piggybacking off of one of your points a second ago. For cyber, on the good guy side, you have to be right 100% of the time. The bad guy has to be right only one time and then they're in. And so there is that chance there, and you don't have to be specifically targeted to be at risk. We're all at risk, and it's unfortunate, but it's true. But the insurance is one thing that you can do. One of the biggest issues we haven't talked about at all is the fraudulent transfer, where somebody, let's say that I'm a vendor of yours, somebody either impersonates me and spoofs my email address, and sends you say an email saying, I have a new bank account, so wire the money off here to here and not to my old account. Or they are actually in my system and they're not spoofing anything. They're really literally sending an email out looking like me to you saying the same thing, a new bank account, that type of thing. Those types of things can be, they're getting very good at it.
Mm.
But if you have systems in place, steps in place to verify, out of band verification and use of code words and apply a little scrutiny to the situation, you could probably avoid most of those even today. But the days of looking for, the email with all the broken English and all of that, that's behind us now
Yeah.
because of AI
Yeah.
primarily, where everything's very sophisticated. So yeah, the first step is recognizing that you have the risk. And I think your analysis about what happens if we're shut down, which is not a very remote possibility for certain types of businesses in particular, I think everybody should do that analysis. What would it cost us if we were shut down, um, with without insurance, and with insurance taking into account the waiting period, and and then have that guide your decisions of how to go forward.
Yeah, I think to everything you just said, like educating yourself is the most critical first step. Like I think these things, like we open their conversation with, is that they can seem overwhelming, and so we want to avoid them and just kind of put our head in the sand and hope, it never happens. Hope is not a strategy though, and so even
um,
just spending the half hour, 45 minutes to listen to this episode, you'll get enough, hopefully, curiosity to say, let me go find some resources and let me go educate myself a little bit on this, or just do, a risk assessment of what my vulnerabilities are. What's my like, I remember when I was working
yeah.
in an aerospace company, we were just starting to bring on OT, um, kind of like automated technology, connected manufacturing was just starting, this or early, 2011, 12, 13. And so we would ask the question, like, what's the vulnerability in having this multi-million dollar machine that creates airplane parts connected to the internet? What's our threat? What's our exposure? And it had never been a thought process of, because all of our engineers cared about was, hey, this used to take us X amount of time and X amount of money. Now we get to cut that in half. Same thing with if you're in, a lot of the folks who I am professional colleagues with are in, they work in the medical space, so at hospitals or service providers. So to your point, like if you have medical devices that are connected to the internet, you've now expanded your threat landscape and threat exposure. Security technology, cameras and access control, all the stuff that keeps us safe can also be turned turned against us in some fashion. And you know, you layer in privacy considerations, GDPR, and similar biometric controls
Yeah,
are
I was just
prevalent
thinking of
in the
BIPA in
US.
Illinois.
It's a whole nother. So not to overwhelm people, it's just get as smart as you can, and or get connected with people who are really, really smart on it, so that you have people to connect with in a time of crisis. But really know, like, I think the cliff notes here is just know what your exposure is, and get an understanding of what the threat is so that you can make educated decisions.
And I'll tell you one thing, even if you're not in a highly regulated space, like a hospital or a financial institution or something like that, if you're doing business with other companies, which you probably are, if you really look at the contracts, you're probably taking on a lot of that
Mm.
responsibility, and you're probably making representations about certain controls and systems and things that you have in place, and you could be indemnifying the other party for these types of things. And so having good systems in place not only protects you there and helps you strengthen your business partner relationships, but it can also be a really, really good differentiator in the marketplace. I wouldn't advise going on your website necessarily and saying, hey, we're like this best cyber secure company in the universe, because that's like an invitation. But maybe getting some uh you know certifications, like a NIST compliance thing, or whatever is relevant in your space, can really help you stand out in the marketplace. So, it's not all the doom and gloom, but it's like, how can we, and I think for anything in life, right, John, anything that comes with a cost, how can I leverage this to my benefit? And how can I hold this out as, a good thing that we are doing this? And in this marketplace now, where it's so hyper competitive and we're so, it's not just that we're all digital, it's all that we're so dependent on each
Mm.
other. Like we saw that with CrowdStrike,
Yeah.
July 19th. I remember exactly the date. And, so glad I wasn't flying that day. But we see how it all, like the dominoes start falling. So, it can be something really valuable for companies to say, hey, look at us, and include it appropriately in your pitches or in your proposals, that you have these certifications, or you have these controls in place.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you see it in things like quality management systems, and in other other programs that companies will put forward as positive competitive differentiators that they go above and beyond. And you can add this to the list of things. So again, back to our earlier discussion, when you're putting together that business proposal for the value of implementing some of these controls, or adding insurance, or whatever the case is, and that becomes piece and parcel to it. So changing gears a little bit, I want to shift to kind of wrap up the discussion a bit. Because you alluded to this earlier on, that recently you've made a bit of a pivot in your career. You're still doing the legal work, still, staying proficient with the world of cyber, but also getting to more of the performance and leadership development. And so for my I think for my listeners here, I want to talk a little bit about that, because if I could identify maybe two um, of the most stressful career fields, security, compliance, cyber, and legal are like up there in the top of like things that can be, you talked about it earlier around, the billable hour,
Yeah.
uh, you know, kind of culture of legal work. And so just kind of the stress of performance across these areas, and cyber and security and general compliance. It's almost like you're on standby waiting for the bad thing to happen, and then responding to that. So, as you were leading yourself through these, but now probably advising others, like, what are your thoughts on high performance in high stress, and dealing with those kind of things, and the folks that you work with and that you coach today, what are you what kind of I guess recommendation guidance are you bringing them if they're handling those same amount of things as well?
Yeah, that's you're so right about all of that. And and I've seen the difference in people who are really able to succeed, the ones who can, regulate their emotions and their responses to stressful situations and their mechanisms and their ways of doing it. It can be such a differentiator, not just in how you do your job, but how you survive, doing your job and your relationships, either, or both, professionally and personally. The people who are better at those types of things. So yeah, I have a whole list of things that I think are super helpful. And I've seen over the years, lawyers in the fetal position on the floor, unable to do anything, or the blow-ups,
Mm,
in the office place, or like the breaking down in tears in the office place. So it's a really real problem, that I'm sure you've seen, or heard things like that as well. So, one of the main things that I recommend is preparation. Oftentimes people get really stressed out because I think in deep inside they don't feel like they're ready.
mm,
And so if you feel like a bout of anxiety coming, like you have a big meeting or you have a big whatever, instead of just stressing out, sitting on the couch, having a drink, doing something, say, you know what, let me spend 5 minutes, 5 minutes,
yeah.
going over something for this. And I think you see, like, you start to calm down. Sunday nights, notorious, Sunday nights, people freak out. Take out your calendar and say, what do I have this week? What are the first 3 things I need to do tomorrow when I get to work? And it just puts your mind at rest. So preparation, I think, is a fantastic anxiety killer. um, Other things are certain things to avoid, like I just mentioned one, drinking too much, eating too much, not exercising, things like that. So on the other side, it's like, yeah, have good, healthy habits, and, get to the gym, force yourself to work out. The key thing in life, I think, is the difference between successful people and not successful people is successful people can make themselves do things they really don't want to do,
Mm,
you know, and uh, I can't overstate that, how important that is. And so just making yourself, if you even if you just say, like my elliptical or my bike back there, just 5 minutes.
yeah.
I'm just going to do it for 5 minutes. I don't feel like doing it 45 minutes. I'm going to do it for 5 minutes. And then you find, all right, you've broken through. And then, it just makes such a difference. And you always go for more than 5 minutes. So same thing with work. I'll just start writing that report, or I'll look at this issue I need to look at for 5 minutes. And then you start to calm down and you're like, what was I so worried about? Another thing I'm really big on is how I talk to myself.
Mm,
And it all started many, many years ago, before I even considered going to law school. I worked with this guy, and he would come into work every day and say, would be like, hey, how are you? He'd be, I'm so tired. I'm so tired. Every day. Oh, I'm so tired today. And before you know it, everybody's like, oh man, I'm tired myself. And then one day I just said, I am never saying those words. You will never hear those words, I'm tired, come out of my mouth. And so I started, kind of by accident, a never say it list. That's the first thing on the list. I know another thing on the list is I don't feel like it, because you never say I don't feel like it when it's something, that you probably shouldn't be doing. It's always something you probably should be doing, right? So I just never say I don't feel like it, because it never leads to any good. And so I think little things like that can make a big difference. And having healthy releases. I just had a call with a client before this, and I said, you know what? She's trying to make a big decision and she's very stressed out about it. I said, don't think about it today. Go to the movies. Go to the movies. You can afford 90 minutes. Go to the movies, take your mind off it, give your brain, like if you're a type A, if you're a driven person, it's hard to turn it off sometimes.
mm,
And so, a healthy, this is from somebody who never goes to the movies, but some kind of healthy outlet to take your mind off it and allow your brain to just calm down a little bit. Those are some of the ways that work for me.
No, it's such a I'm taking notes as you're saying, because I mean, some of it is like spot on. I mean, preparation is like, I think, a very under I just was, doing a session for that I do every month with a couple other fellow performance coaches. We're working our audience that we're speaking to is college and high school coaches, and we talked a lot about just being prepared, and again preparing for high emotion activity, meaning that I'm not just going to magically be ready if we're down by 20 points at halftime and I have to figure it out. I should be
Right.
thinking about proactively, plan for the best, be prepared for the worst. And I think I take that, I take a lot of my professional and coaching leadership acumen from sports, both coaching them, participating in them. And I think there's a lot of dichotomy between those two worlds.
Yes.
And again, the healthy habits goes right, piece and parcel, right? You can't, well, I think you're you're selling yourself short of the potential you could be if you live a healthier lifestyle. Like, do I know people who are very successful who don't eat well, who drink too much, who don't work out? Yes. But man, what could their life be like if they just trying to change those dials a little bit? And I know that I lived that journey my own self, having a much more unhealthy lifestyle right after college, earlier in my career than it has been for the last 15, where I've been more focused on eating well, working out, and having just a healthier life in general. The never say it list, I love that. There's a gentleman that you and I do a lot of work with, Ben Newman, who has a concept that he calls the never do it again list, which I
Yes.
love. But the never say it list I really love, because early on in my career, I would all similar to like the I'm tired. I would always hear, if I asked somebody, how's it going? Oh, I'm so busy. And it was like, okay, are you is that are you like announcing that because you want me to leave you alone? Are you not? Are you like, is that a badge of honor? Yeah, we're all busy. So same like similar thing that I had. I was like, I'm never gonna tell people, I'm never gonna announce
See?
that
See,
I'm
you have
busy.
your list too.
Yeah, I do. I guess I want to actually write it down now, because that was one. But I'm very intentional about not saying I'm busy. I will either say like, "Hey, things are really active." Right? There's a whole
Yeah.
different tone to
Do
like.
do you have time for a short story
I love it.
on
Yeah.
on this point? So
Yes.
when I was a very young lawyer, I was working for this big law firm and doing a lot of work for the biggest partner in the firm. He was a great guy. He recently passed away. Devastated by that. I actually included him in the acknowledgement in my book because he was so impactful in my career and personally. Fantastic guy. But I was working with him a lot. And in fact, I found out later there was a little grumbling in the office, like, well, why Selby get to work with him, and all this. But it was probably better I didn't even know. But one Monday morning, I was walking down the hallway early in the morning at the office, and he was passing me in the office on the way to his office. And he said to me, "Morning, Judy." I was like, "Morning, Doug." He's like, "How are you?" I said, "I'm great. How are you?" He stopped and he goes, "That's why I love working with you. That's why I love working with you." And I was like, "What did I do?" You know what? I had no idea what he was talking about. And then he said, "You always say you're great. You always are up and not like these other people. Oh, it's Monday. Oh, I wish it was still the weekend, whatever." And it wasn't contrived. I never thought about it, but after he said that, I was like, yeah, like the impact on the hearer, like your situation.
Hmm.
And then so if you're the supervisor, the boss, the manager, whatever your bureaucracy is, who do you want to work with? Who do you want to work? Who are you going to give those plum assignments to? Who are, and then we all know how that works. The people, sorry, I'm going like this because my dog wants to jump up on the table. If you, and he probably will, if you want to have those those better experiences. You have to be somebody that people want to work with.
Yeah.
And so if somebody's like, oh, I'm so busy, or like, oh, well, I was going to ask this guy if he wanted to work on this big project with me, or I was going to give him this new responsibility, but he's really busy now, so I better
Yes,
not.
he's so busy. Yeah. And it's such a good point, both for, like you said, if you're the leader setting the tone for an organization, and how just those little interactions, the energy, again, speaking back to Ben, he does a call on Mondays called Monday Ignition, and I'll if anyone's allowed to be a part of it. I'll put the link in the show notes because I think it's a fantastic way to kick off your day. And this Monday he talked about like um energy guiding
Units.
units. That was it. Yeah. And so like, but it got me thinking about the same thought process around like what's the energy that you bring into any situation, and and whether it's me as an employee, as a husband, as a father, all these different touch points and interactions that I have with all the people that I value in my life. Um, I think, and maybe I think about this too much to a fault. It's like, give us an example. Like our interaction right now, Judy, this is going to be the only time you and I interact this week, likely. So this is you get one touch, and so if I'm giving you one touch this week, this month, forever, right? I think about this when I travel and I interact with the Delta person checking my bag. I'm like, I have an opportunity, and I started this during COVID specifically, just because everything was so contentious and everything was so challenging,
Yeah.
so painful. I
Yeah.
go, I don't know if this person's going to get a positive contact today, so they're going to get it from me. So I'm going to say thank you, and I'm going to smile. And I used to
I
say,
love
I'm
that.
going to smile through my mask so they can see it. So smile with my eyes, that they know that like I'm going to say thank you. And if I'm running late, it's not their fault. And if my flight's canceled, it's not their fault. And if my food came late, it's not like and and so like having that whether it's never say it or always say it or never do it or always do it, like whatever that mechanism is that you can, and even if to kind of bring this full circle, you're a cybersecurity lawyer who's dealing with hard shit all the time. Just imagine the enjoyment, like you said, with your colleague Doug of like, yes, that's why, because in such a bad kind of area that usually is doom and gloom, like if you're the one who can still present a positive point of contact, like that makes it even more valuable. I think for folks when they say, wow, in an area where everyone can be like really down and really negative, you still, come through and are someone that I want to be around.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. I couldn't agree with you more. It's just natural. It's just the energy that you put out. And, I think we started talking about this early on, when you're an attorney or any service profession, you approach it. I always consider myself lucky to be there. I'm a blue collar kid. I consider myself lucky to be there. I consider myself lucky to have a mountain of student loan debt, because otherwise I would never have been able to go. And so when you approach life like that and recognize that you are there as like a young employee to make your boss's life easier, as your more seniors to make your like the more senior lives easier, or your clients' lives easier. When you take that approach, you build relationships instead of transactional,
Mm.
encounters. And I just think that makes everybody's life better.
I couldn't agree with you more, and just the um we hear a lot about the concept of gratitude, but I think you just did a great job of articulating like truly what that means is just an appreciation for the opportunity. I mean, and to take it to the most granular level, it's like, hey, you woke up this morning. Not everybody did. Like and again,
That's
not to be
right.
morbid, but just to be real, is that every we're upright, and like life's hard for everybody, and there's different flavors of hard. But I always tell the kids that I coach, I work with, like, choose your hard. Like being out of
Like it.
shape is hard. Being in shape is hard. both are hard. Which hard do you want to do? Like for yourself,
Mhm.
when, part of your story we didn't really spend too much time on, but they kind of that physical transformation of saying like, hey, I've had injuries, I got, this hole in my bone, like I'm overworking it. Like that's hard. It would have been hard to just be like, well, I guess that's, what, like, but no, I'm gonna go be a lawyer and then I'm gonna go do all this stuff.
Yeah,
I just
and
want
now
to
I'm all titanium, by the way,
Well,
yeah.
probably also makes traveling when you have to discuss why you got metal in you and everything you
Yeah,
do, but,
yeah.
better than the alternative. Well, Judy, I wanna just acknowledge, how grateful I am that you joined us. We kinda covered a wide range of
Mhm.
topics like I hoped we would, both on the professional side, the personal, and the high performance, some great, nuggets for folks to pull out of this on how to be a high achiever, your commitment to excellence and your standards, I think, kind of really came across in the discussion. If someone wants to know a little bit more about you, they want to pick up one of your books, they're interested in working with you, where can they find you?
Yeah, my website is, selbystrategies.com. LinkedIn is a great way to find me. I'm very active on LinkedIn, and I have a lot of good content out there about cyber and now the type of other types of issues we've been talking about today. The book is on Amazon, The Untold Secrets to Thrive as a Lawyer, even if you didn't go to Harvard or Yale. So that still cracks me up every time I read it. I apologize. But I think those are the ways. But I really want to acknowledge you and thank you for the opportunity. It's been great speaking with you. And as I said before we even started, my goal is to add some value to your community. If people giving up a chunk of their time, I take that very seriously. And so if people want to follow up with any questions about cyber insurance, or that's really my niche, or anything of the other issues we discussed, feel free. And thank you for the opportunity.
Yeah, thank you, Judy. Thank you again for your time. I appreciate it. Thank for the listeners for giving us your attention for this period of time, and looking forward to. And I guess I'll commit to in the show notes. You'll have a link to Judy's LinkedIn, to her website, all the information that she's expressed here, so it's easy to find. Appreciate your time, and let's go do great things.
Do it. Thanks, John.